Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
I'm honored and privileged indeed to have Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer on the line with us. Tony is one of the most distinguished members of counterintelligence. He's somebody who understood the real story behind 9/11, gave early heads up. He's a counterintelligence expert who actually has been in the field doing real operations. He is now president of the London Institute, Center for Policy, a great think tank, which is really about preparing the United States for all the challenges that we have. And Herb London, who is the founder of this, was a good friend of mine as well as Colonel Shaffer. Colonel Shaffer, welcome to Let the Record Show. I want to begin.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, I want to begin by talking. I'm very upset by this breaking of the dam, literally and figuratively, in the Ukraine. Would you please tell us the significance of this, why this is important, who's behind it, who wins, who loses, and why this is a real threat?
Well, nobody really. I always try to start with who benefits, and frankly, each side kind of benefits a little bit from it. I mean, the Russians theoretically, if they blew it up, it's going to slow down the offensive of the Ukrainians. But if the Ukrainians did it, they've now done an attack within Russian-held territory. It floods like hundreds of villages held by the Russians, and plus it actually endangers the Zaporizhzhia. I always get that name wrong. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, which now we don't even know if it's online or not, and that's held by the Russians. And that, by the way, actually provides power to Ukraine, Russia, and several EU nations. So it's like a head scratcher. Nobody can really figure out who benefits. And at this point, both sides are accusing the other of having done the attack, and that's why it's like, I think, baffling. Nobody really has a handle on who did it at this point. It's a real conundrum.
Is it a threat if they don't have sufficient water to cool the reactor?
Absolutely. Theoretically, and I've got a degree in environmental studies, and one of our finals was actually diagramming a nuclear power plant. So theoretically, if you lose cooling to the reactors, you can scram it. Basically, you can put the material into carbon blocks, and it takes away the ability to generate heat and thereby power the plant. So you could theoretically shut it down without damage. But the problem is this. If you do have to do that, you've then deprived a number of nations of power. And again, Ukraine still gets power from it. The Russians get power from it. Several countries in the EU. So at this point, I think we're going to come to know very quickly what happened. But and ultimately, you're not going to be able to generate power. Thereby, you may not damage it by just shutting off water to it. But then if you shell it, like happened earlier, I think it was late last year, then yeah, you could do some damage to it, and that could create some long-term conditions that would not be conducive to life around the area there.
Well, as a student of history, Tony, I know you're going back to the Napoleonic Wars, you go back to Stalin. There's the whole history of the Russians using a scorched earth policy against their military. And that's why, and of course, I have no inside information, but it seems to me the logical one is that Putin is starting to get desperate, and this is an act of desperation. What's the motivation for Ukrainians destroying their own territory and their own need for energy at a time they're about to begin their counteroffensive?
Well, that is a valid point. And again, we don't, I've heard compelling arguments from both sides on this, but to your point, yeah, for those who have not necessarily understood that as the Russians retreated during the Napoleonic invasion or the Nazi Germany invasion, literally they left nothing left for the adversary to have available for military use. And that could well be here. I mean, we're just seeing right now, Judge, the actual spinning up of the offensive. We don't know what form it's going to take because the Ukrainians have been very close-lipped about it. But at this point, again, I think people need to examine this. We need to know more information and understand better what's going on. But the bottom line is nobody should be pulling up dams which actually deprive people, civilians, of power. And unfortunately, that's a side effect of this war.
Well, you said something very interesting a couple of weeks ago when you had you on Katz and Cosby, where you said there's a lot of good feeling across the United States about the Ukrainians' fight for survival against this territorial aggression, this attempt to destroy another independent sovereign state and take it over. And you said the part of the problem is you have to be careful of, in essence, this is my characterization, wishful thinking. It's a long road ahead for the Ukrainians to win this fight and to survive. Would you explain that?
Yeah, I will. So you and I would agree that it's important to defend. And remember, President Trump actually provided lethal aid and effective military training to the Ukrainians. So I was an advisor to the Trump administration as a national security guy to their campaign. So I fully supported that. The problem is this: if your stated objective is to help the Ukrainians win, Joe Biden is not doing that. Simply throwing money and then virtue signaling is not actually doing anything at this point. The aid has been piecemeal. I mean, come on. You can't give them 18 Abrams and think that's going to take out the whole Russian army. Literally, the Russians outnumber the Ukrainians by 100 to 1 in armor, even if it's not the best armor. No matter if it's bad or not, good or bad, no 18 Abrams is going to defeat 100 Russian tanks. It's just not possible. So that's what I mean, Judge. If winning is the objective, the Biden administration is essentially using woke ideology as their bellwether of how they deal with this. They're not serious. So, and when Blinken gets up like about 3 days ago in Helsinki and says, everything is peachy, everything is just fine, when they had a defeat in Bakhmut. For better or for worse, the Ukrainians were defeated in Bakhmut. It's a big deal. We need to assess that, why it happened, and if you're going to beat the Russians, you need to figure out why that happened to go back at them, because Zelensky himself characterized the Battle of Bakhmut as their version of their version of Saratoga, our Battle of Saratoga. So they didn't win. Why is that? How can we help them? And the Biden administration is not willing to take and examine its own actions on how to improve the support. So that's my issue. If you're trying to win, the Biden administration is not trying to help them win. They're simply virtue signaling and throwing money at it. That's not the way to help the Ukrainians win if that's what you're trying to do.
Well, Colonel, why is it important that Russia be defeated in this contest?
Well, look, this is all about, for Putin, I know what Putin says. Well, it's all about energy. Putin really took an interest in the Donbass and doing the offensive actions after 2013, 2014, when huge resources of natural gas and oil were discovered in the Donbass region in the Black Sea. Judge, ultimately, this is about energy. Putin did not want a net competitor being able to export oil to Russia that would undermine his ability to make money off of Russian oil. That's what this is all about. So no matter how much people in Russia says, Putin says, this is about trying to protect the people in Bakhmut, it's not. It's all about trying to secure resources that the Russians can take advantage of that will prevent the Ukrainians from being a net competitor. That's what it's really all about.
Right.
And I think that's what people have to understand.
Let me switch gears. A matter of real concern to me, and I know to you, is China's threat to the United States.
No doubt.
Would you please explain why the American people should be concerned about this emerging China giant?
Very simply, the Chinese, Judge, have had an interest in expanding out for 30 years to dominate the Pacific Rim. They believe their history, their laws are older than ours. Therefore, they believe they have the right to basically go back to the Ming Dynasty boundaries. They think in terms of centuries. We think in terms of, sound bites. And they decided as a policy, they're going to reclaim all of those territories for their own. And they have they basically planned out an expansion through the Pacific, much like the Japanese did during World War II. And something else, Judge, people tend to forget. The Han think of themselves as the divine people of the planet. There's a racial aspect of this. They believe, like the Nazis, that they have the right to basically take and expand out for living room, unquote. And I'm completely being serious. My friend Gordon Chang talks about this all the time. And that's something we have to be concerned about. They are equally committed to expanding their influence throughout the world as the Germans were during World War II. And if we don't accept that and recognize it, then we're going to be in a lot of trouble.
Well, you know, as head of the London Institute, which is a major think tank and thought leader on these issues of national security and foreign policy and energy issues, I was doing some research in preparation for having you on. And I see one of your colleagues, Mr. O'Brien, wrote a column.
Pete O'Brien.
Right.
Pete O'Brien, yes, sir.
And it was a terrific column. And what I liked about it, it brought me back to my days when I wound up getting a master's degree in political science. And I read Thucydides, The Peloponnesian War,
Right.
which I quote all the time because, you know, I just find it so fascinating. There's something in there that he referred to called the Million Dialogue, which is fundamentally, and I'm making it simplistic, but the theory is the strong do what they want to do and the weak have to suffer the consequences.
Yes, sir.
That's a fair characterization of the Million Dialogue?
It is. Absolutely, sir. Yeah.
Okay, so now that's what we see going on in the world today. In my humble opinion, you see China being super aggressive in all aspects of their foreign policy, their economic policy, their military policy. They're building military bases in the water on phony islands. They're threatening the territorial integrity of their neighbors. They're blocking access to the waterways. They're sending these balloons over the United States of America where they get real intelligence, and our president doesn't think that's a big deal. What do you say about that?
So two things. Your assessment is completely correct. And I actually debated, believe it or not, Ron Paul, when he was running for president, on this very topic about strength. He said, you know, basically the premise is as libertarians, it's not our job to keep the lines of communication and lines of commerce open on the sea. And the answer is, to your point, if we don't do it and use our strength to do it, who will? We will not, alike some other country dominating the Pacific or those areas where we have to do those hard things of maintaining the security of our nation. And so if you have things like you have the Chinese doing and saying things which actually indicate that they're going to be the ones who dictate to us, using their strength to dictate to other countries what they will tell us we can do, we have to defend that. And so Pete's point and my point to you is that we are, for better or for worse, the guardians of the planet's freedoms, freedom of commerce, freedom of navigation. And if we don't do it, Judge, nobody else will. And I think that's why it's so important to recognize that indeed China is a threat. We have to accept that their actions on face value, and that Joe Biden, for whatever reason, does not comprehend what you and I are speaking of. And by the fact he does not compromise it, I would argue he is increasing the likelihood of China being aggressive, because China believes it can act aggressively and get away with all sorts of bad acts of aggression against our interests and the interest of our allies.
Well, so let me use that as a segue, because,
Sure.
and I think it's a good one. The Iran deal. What is with the Biden administration and their obsession with an Iran deal, and don't they understand what the consequences are? Look at the fallout already because of the weak-kneed approach fostered by former Secretary of State Kerry and Obama and Biden and the disintegration of the alliance, the strategic alliance with Saudi Arabia and the so-called more moderate Arab states. What do you say about that?
Well, we had come up at London Center with President Trump. We'd helped create the foundation for the Abraham Accords, which, Judge, I think you'd agree with us, was making an effective.
It was absolutely brilliant, absolutely essential.
Yeah, essential was getting people to work together at the economic level. Brilliant. People trading with each other. What a great idea. And militarily working together to defend equities with the Israelis. So the reason they abandoned it, first off, Biden is anti-Israeli. Please, I hear all this about, he's not. He's anti-Israeli. He's anti-everything the Israelis do. He's anti-Jewish. I'll just put it that way. He is. And so when you accept that as part of it, he's going to naturally reach out to those who do not wish to work with the Israelis, which is the Iranians. And so that's why you see this deference to the Iranians. That's why they want to see this reinstitution of this really poor joint agreed upon framework, the framework that was the agreement that Obama signed. And all that does, Judge, is it hardens the path. It doesn't prevent the Iranians from having a nuclear weapon. It hardens the path and gives them an end date when they can have a weapon. That's what it did. And so Biden's gone back to that. And I am ashamed of the fact that we've deferred this space to the Chinese, because the Chinese are now making peace between the Iranians and the Saudis. So it is through the weakness of the Obama foreign policy that we see all of those out there who wish to undermine our strength and our allies' strength working together. And that's why you see right now the Biden administration deferring to the Iranians for purposes of allowing them to actually create strength, a nuclear program. And by the way, once they have nuclear weapons, that is, say, once the Iranians have confirmed nuclear weapons in their possession, ready to use, the Saudis are going to get theirs. Saudis already bought theirs. The Saudis' nuclear weapons are actually in Rawalpindi in Pakistan. They paid the Pakistanis to develop them. And we're going to be facing a nuclear Cold War in the Middle East. And I don't believe it's in our interest to allow that to happen, especially the Israelis. The Israelis have nuclear weapons. So this could be a real mess if we defer to others to allow them to dominate the foreign policy arena in ways which I don't think will be healthy to our allies.
Well, let me ask you this, Tony. What should the Israelis do faced by a weak-kneed Biden administration who are apologists for the Iranian regime? What should they be doing now?
So there's two things. First, I think they need to be working independently on their own with the Egyptians, with the Saudis, with other nations which have actually signed aboard the Abraham Accords, and move forward. We've offered the London Center. We've spoken to a number of these seniors. Like, you don't necessarily need the Biden administration to be the guarantor of that agreement. You can do that. You can do it on your own. It's not going to be as easy. There's going to be some things missing, but you can still do it. I recommend they act independently. Secondly, I think people have to start looking at 2024 and whoever runs against Joe Biden. Even a Democrat like RFK would be better. I think RFK would even be open to the idea that we don't want to see or promote a Middle East nuclear arms race. So anybody's better than Biden on this, even some of his own Democrat challengers. And so this is where we need to focus on 2024 and put this before the American people as a political issue that must be addressed as part of that election.
Well, I thought it was very interesting that Nikki Haley, former ambassador and governor of the state of South Carolina, as a presidential candidate, said, look, if you're voting for Joe Biden, you're really voting for Kamala Harris for the presidency. What say you?
So I think both of them are essentially puppets of Obama. Let me be blunt. Obama said several times he wished he could be president for a third term and have people work for him. And I think that's why you see, Judge, a delay. Anytime something happens, there's like a delay. It has to go through Valerie Jarrett and all these other folks. Joe Biden, people have to accept that Joe Biden cannot function at the level necessary to be president. Therefore, who's really in charge? And I would argue because of the Obama folks in the White House, I think it's Obama calling the shots primarily. Even to Kamala Harris, he'd be calling the shots.
All right, let me ask you one final topic before I let you go, Colonel.
Sure.
Which is very troubling to me, and I've followed this very carefully as a lawyer and a quasi-political commentator, as a former judge. The Durham report, which showed very troubling aspects about how the integration into the political process of intelligence agencies as well as the FBI, and how they tainted everything from the very beginning of the Trump presidency. What say you?
So I actually have spoken with two former U.S. Attorney Generals on this. One of them, I don't think Ed would mind me mentioning his name. I actually met with Ed Meese on this. And to circle the square, this is the challenge. There's no doubt that crimes were committed, that a number of these crimes were incidental to official government activities, to include James Comey, the director of the FBI, who had basically acknowledged that he allowed things to get out of control. I think it's beyond that. And, Judge, if you go to the classified annex, it shows that they not only suppressed exculpatory information going to judges like you, to the FISA court, that they did it with malice aforethought. And the ultimate outcome was election interference. So this is one of those things where I think we all have to take a sober look at this and understand that people use their official positions of authority and power to abuse their authority and take a side politically. We cannot permit federal authorities to basically be a solely owned subsidiary of either party. And again, I think a number of attorneys general recognize the danger of allowing this to not be addressed. And I don't know if there's a path forward, but the bottom line is this, my judge. I mean, again, to your point, I'm a credentialed special agent. I've done investigations. I know how to do the things they did. you never abuse your authority. You should have a conscience. If you don't have a conscience, you should go to jail for abusing it. And I think that's where we're at. Comey and some of those guys really need to be held accountable. And I'm not certain at this point that Merrick Garland is going to be doing anything at all.
Well,
to actually
what's very shocking to me, and you, with your awesome background and experience, know that when they put out that letter, that 51 signatory letter, which got Hunter Biden off the hook and got Joe Biden off the hook, so that the former vice president in a debate with President Trump could say, well, look, there's nothing to this laptop issue. I've been cleared by the 51 intelligence people. What do you say about that?
Well, it's interesting. So, Judge, on that point, look, I actually had access to the hard drive in real time. I actually, the guy who brought it to the FBI in 2019 was a guy named Colonel Ron Scott. He was the uncle of JP, the computer tech. So it's like I knew for a fact it was real based on my direct access. And yet, Judge, I wasn't permitted to talk about it because the media decided that I'm a qualified retired intelligence officer. My whole bio and career is read in the congressional record. I'm a qualified expert. But simply because I disagreed with the cabal, those 51, I was suppressed and they were promoted. So this is another thing we have to be aware of, is that qualified experts who take a political position and use their authorities to basically dissuade the American people from understanding the truth is dangerous. And that's what my thoughts are on that. And we cannot permit individuals like John Brennan, Jim Clapper, all these guys who basically have abused their authority to ever have any office or clearance again. That's what we have to prevent.
Well, Colonel Shaffer, I want to thank you very, very much. Tony Shaffer, distinguished lieutenant colonel, distinguished counterintelligence officer, somebody who's ahead of the curve on the whole 9/11 problem, the whole Afghanistan situation. We've been very fortunate to have you on our show today. I thank you very much on behalf of our audience, and we'd love to have you back again. Thank you very much.
Love to come back, Judge. Thank you for having me.